Much for the intro, and I'm super excited to be here and talk about this very important topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And it is really about, the importance of teaching our children at a very young age about the importance of healthy eating and how to really turn it into a lifestyle. So Dan shared a little bit of my background. So what I'd like to do is start by telling you a little bit about Nurture Life and the genesis of the founding of Nurture Life. So like Dan mentioned, I am a lifelong foodie. I'm also the daughter of a registered dietitian, and I was very fortunate to grow up in an incredibly food-forward household. My mom loved fresh, nutritionally balanced food, and so I never really knew anything different when I was a child. We always had, very healthy, very nutritionally balanced food with all three of our meals, and very, very little processed food. And it wasn't until I started school and saw what a lot of my classmates were eating that I realized like I was in a very different situation when it came to food in our household, in that everything was cooked from scratch, but that the majority of children in our country when I was growing up, but certainly even more so now, are not necessarily eating 3 meals a day that are home cooked. In the vast majority of cases, they're typically eating something that has been to some degree processed, is much more conveniently available. And what's happening in many cases is that children aren't necessarily growing up eating the best in terms of ingredients, quality of ingredients, real clean food, and nutritionally balanced. And that's something that has manifested itself in a lot of issues when it comes to children's health. And so that's really what I'm here to talk about. In terms of Nurture Life, I co-founded Nurture Life with my partner approximately 6 years ago. And the whole genesis for Nurture Life was really based off of, just being a lifelong foodie and growing up, being fortunate enough to always eat really, really well and really healthily. But even more so than that, the birth of our son, who is now 9 years old. So we have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when our 9-year-old first started eating solid foods, and I'm sure a lot of the folks on this presentation can relate to this, especially folks who have children, is that when they're babies and they're eating, purees, whether it's single ingredient, combination purees, there are a lot of really good options available. There are a lot of baby food companies that are providing, very high quality, very clean purees. But when it comes to, a baby starting to self-feed, and certainly toddlers eating, that's really where it all starts to fall apart. And, we have a lot of, shelf stable, whether it's boxed mac and cheese or, frozen foods that tend to be very focused on, proteins and carbs options, but you really don't have, when it comes to, toddler and kids food, really fresh, healthy, nutritionally balanced meals. And so when I say it all falls apart, that's when parents really don't have conveniently available options unless they do it themselves, which is, incredibly time consuming. And that's really why we founded Nurture Life, just based off of the experience that we had with our 9-year-old, wanting to feed him really fresh, really high quality, nutritionally balanced food, good varieties, but not finding them commercially available and having to do it all ourselves. And we thought, there've got to be a lot of other parents that are experiencing this firsthand. Like, what can we do to take what we did for our son, James, which was really cooking all of his food from scratch, and provide a solution for parents that were, very health conscious, wanted to feed their kids really, really good quality food, but didn't have the time to do it themselves. And so that was really the genesis behind Nurture Life. So I'd like to start by talking about the state of children's nutrition in our country and why teaching children from a very early age the importance of healthy eating is so incredibly critical, especially at a time like now. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard, in terms of the state of children's nutrition, continues to get worse and worse as we continue to go decade by decade. And I mean, you can certainly see on this slide today, 1 in 3 children in the US are overweight. 1 in 5 children who are starting kindergarten are already considered overweight. I mean, that is an absolute tragedy. And this progression only continues to get worse. 90% of kids in our country exceed the recommended daily intake of sodium by nearly 1,000 milligrams on average. And so what we're doing right now from a food perspective is so many of our children are essentially overfed and undernourished. And that is a critical issue in our country when it comes to ensuring not only the health of children when they're young, but certainly as they grow into their adolescent years, their teenage years, and then certainly into their adult years. There's another stat that I find, absolutely alarming, which is when a child is overweight in kindergarten, they're 4 times more likely to be obese by the time that they're teenagers. And so the reason why I'm stressing these stats is that it's so incredibly critical to start from the beginning when it comes to children and teaching them about good eating habits and really working on ensuring good eating habits from the start. And usually, like I mentioned before, where that falls down isn't in the baby stages. Typically, when a child eats best is when they're a baby, and when they're on breast milk or formula and starting to eat purees, they tend to eat very clean, very nutritious foods. It's really when they start to self-feed and when they become toddlers that everything really does fall apart, and there's an introduction of too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the good stuff. And speaking of not enough of the good stuff, this last stat, 27% of young kids do not consume a single serving of vegetables in a day. I mean, that is absolutely, horrific when it comes to the healthfulness of children and proper physical growth and brain growth and development, because they're just not getting the vitamins and minerals that they need and that their growing bodies need. And so really working on improving, the offerings that we have and what our kids are eating at a very early stage is so incredibly critical. Another thing that's really alarming is just how much sugar and how much salt children are consuming today. And, this is kind of a graphical representation of what we're typically seeing. The middle of each one of these the sugar is on the left, the salt is on the right. And, the middle is essentially what is recommended. And on the right-hand side is what is currently being consumed. So what you can see here is that, children today, are just eating way too many empty calories and not getting enough nutrition, and they're over consuming when it comes to sugar and salt. And I think there's just so much work that we need to do, as parents and also, as providers, in terms of, making sure that we're more disciplined and that we're doing better when it comes to the salt consumption and the sugar consumption of our kids. And so much of this is not necessarily coming from the core meals, like the breakfast, lunch, and dinners that children are eating, but it's really coming from snacking. And so being much more judicious about what our children snack on, have healthy snacks, and not let children snack throughout the day is incredibly critical to trying to lower the sugar and salt consumptions and making sure that they're saving their appetites for meals that really matter, like the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So why is this so important? Why is it so important for children to eat healthy and learn how to eat healthy and make healthy food choices from the start? So there are a whole host of stats on, the importance of proper nutrition from the start, but I just pulled out some of the major ones in terms of the challenges and the benefits when it comes to eating healthy. So the first is fewer behavioral and sleep problems, higher academic achievement, higher self-esteem. And one of the ones that is just so critical is when a child eats healthy from the start, there's far less risk of multiple chronic conditions, from asthma and heart disease to type 2 diabetes, by the time they hit their teenage years, and certainly when they hit adult years. So now is the time when a child is young to really, really start teaching healthy eating habits and modeling healthy eating habits. So I want to talk a little bit about why this has happened and what we can do, as an industry and certainly as food providers, but also as parents to try to reverse this trend. So I want to talk a little bit about what the barriers are that are truly bridging the gap between education and execution and fostering healthy eating for children. So the first thing is back to what I was talking about in terms of parents are more health conscious and educated about good food choices than ever before. But the challenge is that they lack time. So parents today are busier than ever before between work, family commitments and obligations, children's activities, children's lifestyles today. I mean, we talk so much about how, parents are more time-starved than ever before. Mothers of young children are the most time-starved demographic in our country. And because of this, many, many parents just do not have the time to plan and grocery shop and prep and cook and clean up and all the time that it requires to essentially make a nutritionally balanced from scratch meal. And so what parents need to turn to, because it's practical and they just need to get through the day and survive, is they turn to what is readily available. What are the convenient food options? The big challenge here is that in our industry, unfortunately, there's definitely been a trade-off between convenience and nutrition. The vast majority of convenient foods for kids tends not to be nutritious, certainly not nutritionally balanced and healthy. And that's where everything falls down for parents. And one of the things about Nurture-Life that we believe so strongly in, and why we created this company, is we believe that convenience and nutrition do not have to be a trade-off. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We want to provide a solution for families that is not only nutritious, but it's also convenient. It's something where parents can get a fully nutritionally balanced meal for their kids that is fully prepared, delivered direct to their door and ready in 2 minutes or less. And we feel really strongly that, not only should Nurture-Life be doing this, but many other food companies can provide solutions to families, that don't have to compromise on nutrition. They can be super convenient, but they don't have to be highly processed. They don't have to be, high in sugar and salt and, and fat. They don't have to lack, some of the critical ingredients like vegetables, in order to, provide, convenience. And so talking about, what's happening here, it's just really, the vast majority of what we find in the grocery store is, and if you're essentially not doing it yourself, but you're looking for healthy kids food, is a lack of good options. Like I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of the options today tend to be, highly processed. If they're ready to eat, they tend to be, very focused on, protein. So it could be just chicken meatballs or fish sticks or chicken bites and, or sliders. And then, the other corollary to that tends to be things like French fries and, and cheese sticks and things like that. So it's just, a lot of protein, a lot of carbs, not a lot of vegetables and not a lot of balance. And then the other challenge is that, there isn't a lot of transparency when it comes to the ingredients in kids' food. And so one of the things that, we feel really, really strongly about is being very transparent with parents on what is actually included, in a meal, whether it is, listing out the ingredients, being very, very transparent in terms of front of pack claims. And then certainly, of course, which everyone has to adhere to, is full ingredient lists and nutrition facts, and helping, as a food business, and educating parents on, what is in the food, what is healthy, what is not, what is nutritionally balanced, what is not. And then the last thing that is super important to address is picky eating. So one of the challenges in our country is that I think parents, according to a survey, parents, self-identify 70% of parents self-identify their kids as picky eaters. And, and as parents, you want your child to eat, you want to please your child, you don't want them to be unhappy at mealtime. And so what's happening is a lot of parents are just letting their kids eat, what they want to eat or what they're familiar with, what they're comfortable with, which tends to be, a lot of, pancakes at breakfast, waffles at breakfast, chicken bites and mac and cheese, and a lot of the same. And one of the things that's so critical, with children is that so much of what kids want to eat is really based off of what they're familiar with. And so one of the ways that we find is incredibly effective, and we've worked with thousands of families on this to combat picky eating, is just being really conscientious as a parent to continually expose your child to different foods and to new foods, and know that a lot of times your child, if it's the first time that they've seen, a new fish or a new broccoli, that they're going to most likely reject it. It typically takes somewhere between 7 and 14 tries, according to research, of a child to be exposed to a new food, a new ingredient, before they begin to like it and then eventually love it. And so part of, I think, our job as the food industry and as providers is to really educate parents on the importance of continued exposure to variety and to new foods in order to help combat picky eating. Because so much of what happens in terms of the degradation of our kids' diets is really letting them succumb to picky eating and then not proactively trying to change that. But parents can absolutely change how their kids eat and expand their palates by being proactive and making sure that they're constantly being exposed to new foods. So I talked earlier about the genesis of Nurtralife and, what's important to us as a business. But I wanted to kind of, reiterate it here again with a few more things that are just more concrete in terms of, what we believe is really, really important for kids' food brands to really sort of focus on in terms of the products that they're offering to families. So the first thing is what I just talked about. So essentially balance and variety at all ages. So, not being so heavy on protein and carbs and really focusing on balance and making sure that, kids' meal offerings and what we offer to parents to feed their kids has that balance, has a really healthy balance of, protein and carbs and dairy and, produce and fruits, fruits and vegetables essentially, and really making sure that a kid, is getting all of the macronutrients and micronutrients that they need for their proper, brain and physical growth and development. And then constantly introducing variety. Veggies is something that we stress as a business, and we always ensure that with every single Nurtralife meal, we have veggies on every plate. And in the vast majority of our meals, it's a full serving of veggies, because this is the one component that is so incredibly critical for a child's development that in the vast majority of cases, per the stats I shared earlier, are just really, really missing. And so veggies are so important. Nutrient dense, no empty calories. So that's another thing that's really important to us. A lot of kids today fill up on a lot of empty calories, whether it's, through snacking, whether it's through sodas or, fruit and sugar heavy drinks, really making sure that children fill up on food that will fuel their bodies. So making sure that it's nutrient dense. Clean, clear, understandable ingredients. So this is something, that, we help educate parents and our families to constantly look out for is, making sure that, the ingredients make sense, that they're clean, that they're real, that when they're reading an ingredient list, what is at the top is ingredients that they can recognize and, and are real foods like things, like vegetables and, proteins and, and things that are readily understandable. And then the last is just always focusing on variety to help expand a kid's palate. And that's one of the most critical things when it comes to helping to educate children very early on in terms of the importance of, healthy food and healthy eating, is just constantly introducing and emphasizing the importance of variety. The other thing that we think, we found with a lot of our families works really, really well is to really talk to children about, the different foods and the different ingredients that they're eating. Talk about, say for instance, in this image, where carrots are coming from, what vitamins and minerals carrots have that really help, your child in terms of their just, physical health, where salmon comes from and why it's important to eat salmon, what's important and what the benefits are of things like omega-3 fatty acids. And so I've talked about a lot of this already, but we always think it's super important, as a food brand, and especially as a food brand that's focused on children, we have a responsibility to help parents improve their children's nutritional profiles. We have a responsibility to provide, healthy, nutritious meals that parents can be proud to serve and that will really, really fuel properly kids' growing bodies. So how can food brands, certainly beyond Nurture-Life help? So the first thing is, we call it the basics, but cleaner, less processed ingredients and more emphasis on balance and variety. Continually working to decrease added sugar, salt, trans fats, and preservatives. And certainly to be a resource to customers, to help educate them with credible sources on, not only what good food and balanced food for their kids looks like, but how do you do things like combat picky eating? How do you help educate your children on, making healthy food choices? How do you help educate your children on, not only making good food choices, but why good food choices are important to them then and now? And the other thing that we also do believe is certainly that, no parent is perfect, no food brand is going to be perfect, and no child is going to be perfect in what they eat. If your child really, really wants to eat, unhealthy foods, try to have them do it in moderation and then gradually decline it and balance that more with healthier and healthier food choices. We find that is incredibly effective, especially with parents of children with picky eaters or parents that have children that have been eating more unhealthily than healthy for many, many years. And it does work, but it definitely takes commitment from the parents. And it also takes a ton of commitment from, companies like Nurture-Life, the food brands, to not only educate parents, but to create healthy food options, healthy meals for children. And then, another thing that is super important is just to teach kids that, healthy doesn't necessarily mean that it tastes bad. Like healthy can be incredibly delicious. And that's one thing that we at Nurture-Life believe so strongly in. Like we believe that healthy food is incredibly delicious and we can be, very creative about what we do in terms of creating meals that, say, for instance, a child, would love to eat like a mac and cheese, but, in terms of, probably the best picky eater favorite out there and one of the most loved and consumed meals by children in our country is mac and cheese. And we recognize that. And we as Nurture-Life know that not every child is going to eat teriyaki salmon and most children will love mac and cheese. So for example, with our mac and cheese, we, have a full serving of butternut squash in our mac and cheese. We're very low in sodium. We don't add any added sugar. And our noodles, our elbow pasta is essentially whole wheat. So if you're going to do, something like a mac and cheese or something like a chicken bites, that's just fine, but try to do it as healthily as possible. And that can be done and it can be absolutely delicious for children. And that is pretty much it. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, and I think he's going to open it up for questions.